So we're doing a little different thing tonight. We've had this iPad back there, and it allows me to control the slides with the iPad. Well, it was working a little bit ago. There it goes. All right. So if that fails, I'm going to switch to the pointer, or the, whatever, the remote. But, yeah, no doubt. So, all right. So tonight we start chapter 10, but just a brief introduction of this next section in the book. We're into the last 4 chapters of the book, and it's pretty much the activity of an encourager, and it's, in my mind, it's where the rubber hits the road. So at the end of each of the chapters up to this point, we've given like weekly tasks. Go encourage someone. Go do this for such and such type person. Be an encourager, essentially. You've had homework assignments. Well, now we're going to start studying biblical examples of encouragers. So the next 4 weeks tonight is Courage to Build, Nehemiah. Oh, and by the way, instead of Nehemiah, I say Nineveh. I don't know why my brain's doing that. But so I'm using those synonymously tonight. So just ignore that I said Nineveh if I say Nineveh when I mean Nehemiah. All right, next week, Paul's going to pick us up with Courage to Bloom, Barnabas. Hey, the book's about Barnabas. And then the next one after that is Courage to Believe. We'll be talking about Jesus. And then the last class that we have on this book will be Courage to Battle, God the Father. So if you're reading ahead, you've got some good material ahead of you. But tonight we're going to talk about Nehemiah. So what I'd like for you to do is turn to Nehemiah. We're going to be in Nehemiah most of the night, and we're going to be jumping back and forth in Nehemiah. This chapter is a little different. I don't know if you've noticed when you've read it. It's about Nehemiah, then it's about being an encourager in a group, and then it goes back to Nehemiah. So you're going to see a little oddity with this one, or difference as we go. So I'm in Nehemiah. I'm in English Standard Version when I'm reading. So just so you're aware what I'm doing, or what I'm using. All right. Key points in our lesson tonight is dreams, discouragement, determination, planning, presentation, problem solving, praise or celebration, and then 10 steps. If we have time, we're going to get into the 10 steps for encouraging groups. All right, so those are the key points. They're also the key sections in the chapter. All right, so let's do an introduction to Nehemiah. Nehemiah is at the end of the Israelites' exile, right? Where it's been 70 years. So keep in mind the people that we're talking about at this point in time, if they say they were 10 years old 70 years ago, that means they have either passed away when they went into captivity or they're 80, all right? So anybody who's coming back from exile, they either were left there or they are coming back and they've never been to Jerusalem. So keep that in mind when we're talking about this. All right, so Nehemiah, the king at the time is a Persian king, Artaxerxes. Xerxes? Really? Okay. He sent Nehemiah to help rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Nehemiah was part of the third wave of the returning Jews from exile. Okay, the third wave. There was opposition to rebuild the efforts. We'll be talking about those. And then Nehemiah did what God had put into his heart. And that's Nehemiah 2:12 and 7:5. And we'll be touching base on those when we go. All right, so that's a real quick introduction to Nehemiah. So let's talk about dreams. What are dreams? Who can tell me what a dream is? It doesn't matter. There are good ones and there's bad ones. So, Rachel?
I think sometimes it's a way for our minds to sort out the day's events.
To sort out the day's events.
Yeah, it's like a rehash sometimes, or sometimes it's trying to, it seems like it's to solve, it's helping you solve a problem.
Okay, you're using the definition, I've gone to sleep and I've had a dream? Okay, so let's use a different word. I've used idea, and the book uses the word idea. I do that too. I have those dreams where I'm like, oh, I solved a problem from yesterday. Best time in the morning is when I solve a problem. That's great. But no, we're talking about an idea. So say you want to go on a vacation, right? Well, you need to do what? You need to plan on that vacation. So I have a dream. Penny and I were planning on going to England for our 35th anniversary. That's in like a year and a half or so. All right, so that's our dream, our idea. All right, so it's that concept. So who else can give me an idea of what a dream or an idea is? Good or bad? That's a good definition, something you really want to do and you'd make plans for it. When I look at you, Donna, I think of gardening. Well, you plant a garden each year, right? That's your dream or your idea is to plant a garden. How many of you guys have built a house recently? Or if you've ever built a house, right? You had a dream of building a house, an idea of building a house, right? So that's what a dream is. The book talks about newlyweds. Well, how many of us are newlyweds in here? I mean, we still get the butterflies in our tummies when we think about our husbands and wives, right? So, well, the book uses the idea of newlyweds planning their family. They have a dream for their family, right? They have children. They want to have children and raise them. So, but with every dream, there's a price. There's a cost, right? Going to the example of building a house, right? Or planning a vacation. There's a cost to going on my vacation. There's a cost to building a house, right? So is it going to be worth the cost or not? With kids, if you use the kids example, how many of us have sacrificed our time for our kids? That's a cost. I would call it an opportunity cost, right? Because you miss out on other things to be able to accomplish that dream or goal. So I put on here price equals cost, which equals sacrifice, which equals commitment, which equals a reward. What would your reward be if you were building a house, Gail? Having it done, right? But aren't all the fun things in the middle, aren't they rewarding? Picking out the carpeting, the curtains, the refrigerator, the appliances, right? Those are rewarding. But is that the ultimate reward? No, right? Having kids. Newlyweds, they plan, they have babies. Where's the ultimate reward for us as parents and our kids? Where? What? Being together and raising them to where they go to heaven, right? Donna, what were you saying? Yes, I would shorten that. I would say get them out of the house. It was a celebration when Sydney got married to Brandon and they're living in their own house, right? But ultimately, I want them to go to heaven, as all of us want, right? Okay, so what the book talks about is giving birth. It's going back to that. They use throughout the first part of the chapter talking about moms giving birth to babies, okay? So how much work is it to have a baby, moms? A lot. You have 9 months, you have a certain amount of time that you are, maybe at the beginning the book talks about ladies. Penny got a little bit of morning sickness. How many of the ladies had morning sickness? So that was a challenge, right? You dealt with that, and then things got better. Then it was the kidneys baby playing punching bag with the kidneys or whatever. Every mom's different, right? But at the end, you have your baby, and what was that? It's all worth it. That's your reward. So your plan, your goal was, your dream was to have a baby. It was hard. You had a baby. But now the work really begins, right? With your kids. Because now you've got to raise them. Ecclesiastes 7:8. Ecclesiastes 7:8. I put it up there. I meant to delete it out so we'd look it up. But better is the end of things than its beginning. Better is the end than the beginning. What do you think about that statement? Yeah, you've accomplished it. Well, isn't it exciting to get going on a project, to begin working on a dream? Is that rewarding? For some of us who are, I like planning, okay? So I sit down, give me a spreadsheet, I've planned it out, I'm happy, all right? All the work, yep, check, 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 I met it. Oh, now we're on vacation. Now I'm like, I literally get empty because, like, when we got back from October going down to Florida, I was like, now what? It was kind of empty, so that was a different kind of reward. I still enjoyed going down there, but all right. So visualizing a dream versus committing to a dream, what's the difference there?
It's easy to dream and it's not a lot of effort put into that, but to actually see something through, the commitment part is the work.
Very good. So we can have dreams. When Penny and I use it as an example, our 35th anniversary, we're like, what do we want to do? She wants to go to Alaska for 2 weeks. No way. I'd go during the summer. During the winter, no way. I get enough winter here. I want to go down to Virgin Islands or someplace warm, take a cruise. So that's my dream. Her dream is we're different. But we came to an agreement on one, which we both are now working toward. We're committed to, all right? So now we are actually working toward it. Once you're pregnant, and I'm talking in the church, hopefully nobody's thinking of the negative side of that, you're going to work through, the husband's going to be there to help, be a helpmate to the wife, right? The wife is sadly going to have to take necessary precautions, necessary measures to be healthy throughout the pregnancy. So it's a commitment, right? If you're building a house, right, you kind of committed to it. So you get that house, right? So raising kids, I beat that up. Okay, let's move on. So Nineveh's dream, right? If you're building a house. Nehemiah's dream. I knew I was going to do it once. Okay, let's look at Nehemiah 1, 2, and 3. Nehemiah 1 through 3. Who'd like to read that for us? Please.
The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hekeliah. Now it happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire.
Okay, so here we have Nehemiah. Some visitors came by, and he had a question for them. Now remember, he's part of the third wave of Jews going back. He's probably never been there, right, to Jerusalem. He's only heard about Jerusalem. Probably the grandeur of it back before the exile, right, when Israel was prospering. Israel was one of the top nations in the world. And then, of course, they threw it away. Matter of fact, Nineveh talks about it. Nehemiah talks about it further in the book. So he's asking questions. Well, 2 waves have gone. What's it like over there? Is it still grandeur? Is it still, is it booming? No, they're getting bad news. So his bad news is the remnant that's left there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. Does anybody have a different word than shame? Reproach. Yeah, they were looked down upon. Israel was an empty nation going back out of exile, right? Going back to what happened to Jerusalem when they finally took all the Israelites and sent them away into exile. What had happened to Jerusalem? It had been stormed by a foreign army. They burnt everything, all the homes, everything got burnt. The place was burnt, the walls were burnt, it was destroyed. Okay? So they're going back and they're just seeing ruins. It's just destroyed. So again, an empty nation going back. All right. So what was the impact on Nehemiah? What was his impact? Let's read verse 4. Rachel, can you read verse 4?
As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven.
So when we get into trouble, what do? What's our first reaction to do? Would we do the same thing? Right? We would sit down and whatever the situation, we pray to God for guidance, right? Well, that's what Nehemiah did here. He sat down, he wept, he was sad. He was thinking he was going to be hearing good news. It was already good news that the king had allowed them to go back, right? But no, he sat down and wept and mourned for days. And then he continued fasting and praying for God for guidance. Okay, so let's jump on over to chapter 2, verse 1. We're going to read verses 1 through 8. Anybody? We're going to go through 8. Or you read as far as you'd like, Donna, and then I'll pick somebody else.
So the king said, "Why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should my face be sad, when the city, the place of my father's tomb, lies desolate, and escaped from him consumed by fire?" And the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to God, and I said to the king, "If it please the king, and your servant is found favor before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tomb, that I may rebuild it." And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside me, "How long will your journey be, and when will you return?" So I placed the king who sent me, and I gave him a definite time. Then I said to the king, "If it please the king, let the letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. And the letter raised up the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make means for the gates of the fortress, which is by the temple, for the wall of the city, and for the house to which I will go." And the king granted them to me, because the good hand of my God was on me.
All right, thank you. All right, so here he's been grieving, right? And do we know what Nehemiah's job was for the king? Can you tell from what we read? A cupbearer, right? What does that mean? It's I guess the picture kind of gives it away too, doesn't it? His job is to serve the wine to the king and I guess queen, right? So he's a cupbearer. For sure. Yeah. I left that part out. Fair enough. But in this case, it reminds me of Esther. What was Esther's thing with the king? What would happen if she approached the king? Paul mentioned it, I think, last Wednesday. What would happen if Esther just approached the king and he didn't hand out a scepter? Yeah, be killed. Or anybody would be hauled off and killed because of disrespect, right? So here he knows he has to have a good demeanor, right? He's got to be a happy person. Well, the king obviously can tell that something's wrong with him. You know, we walk around, you've seen people walk around, they're like this. I'm happy, right? I'm happy, right? So here's the king notices something, there's something wrong with him. And he says, why is your face sad? Seeing you are not sick, this is nothing but sadness in the heart. Then I was very much afraid. Again, if the king's displeased with you, what's he going to do? Replace you. Yeah, as Gail just said. All right, so what's one of the first things he does? Well, the king asks him, hey, what's up? So the king must like him. That's favorable, right? So he says, his response to him, let the king live forever. So he's giving them those attaboys, those praises to make him feel good. Why should not my face be sad? When the city, and this is where he has courage like Esther, right? Because he speaks his mind graciously because he says, hey, you're a great king, right? Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Okay, so the king's like, oh, I didn't want to hear this, right? What a load of burden that Nehemiah just dumped on the king. And he says, then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So he knew, oh, wait, you must need something. How can I help you? The king was already gracious enough to let the Israelites go back to their country. So now he's like, okay, what else do we want? Takes it another step. Well, if I got that, I'm going to take more, or I'm going to ask for more. So then he asks, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, send me to Judah. Okay, so before he did that, where is it? He said a really quick prayer. How many of you guys had a conversation with someone and in the middle of the conversation said a quick prayer to God? You're having a conversation and you're like, I don't know how to respond to this. Dear Lord, help me respond appropriately to the person. I would assume we've all been in that kind of situation because we don't want to offend anybody, right? So, what ultimately I have on here is God's hand was with him. And you get that from the last verse 8, where he says, and the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. So that says that God's will was with Nehemiah. Okay? So let's jump down to, so Nehemiah has taken off. He's on his way over to Jerusalem. And we're going to jump down to 11 through 16. 11 through 16. And I'm just going to read it because I want to speed up a little bit. So first thing Nehemiah does is he surveys the land for 3 days. He says, so I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, and I and a few men with me. And I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and the dung gate. And I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall. And I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone, and what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. So here he's planning. We're going to get into that term in a little bit. So he's surveying what needs to be done. And then verse 17 and 18, then I said to them, this is where he's pitching the build. He's calling the workers to work. He says, then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruin with its gates burned? Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. Okay, so that was the call to action that finishes Nehemiah's dream. Okay, now let's look at, there we go, Nehemiah's discouragements. Back to our bad dreams, okay? It takes work to get to that reward. Well, Nehemiah had some discouragements, all right? If we jump back to 2:10, we're introduced to two characters. And I'm calling it characters, they're people, but they're negative nannies, I guess. They're against what Nehemiah is doing. It reads, but when Sanballat, hopefully I pronounced that properly, the Horonite and Tobiah, the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. So this is the first group, the first obstacle that Nehemiah has to deal with, right? Some people who are just unhappy that he's there to help the Israelites in any way, shape, or form. And they plague Nehemiah throughout the book, or a few times more. Okay, then we jump to 2:19. Here we go again. But when Sanballat, and the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite servant, and Geshem, the Arab, heard of it, they jeered and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? So now they're voicing their opinion to him, to the whole group, saying, hey, are you going up against the king? Well, Nehemiah, who sent him? Who gave him their blessing? The king did, right? So he knows that there's not going to be a problem with the king, that he's doing it the way he should be. Okay, and he has the king's blessing. Okay, now let's apply this to here at the church or at work. I like to think of the church. Okay, not everybody wants us to succeed and may be against us. Who do you think is against the church? The devil, right? Devil could be a family member. Devil could be in their actions, right? The world. Anybody who's against God is an enemy, right? They are out to prevent us from succeeding and making it to heaven. What might get criticized for what we are doing?
People may criticize us for doing things, for good things. You know, I got a returned house-to-house magazine in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
It was in an envelope, so the person had gone to effort to mail it back, specifically. And they said, please take our name off of your propaganda. We don't want it anymore. And basically, we've been hurt before by Christians, quote unquote. And so we know it's all like hypocrisy or something. And they said, if we get any more of your mail, we're just going to use it as fire kindling or fire.
At least he read it.
It's really sad for that person because they have had the devil's influence in different ways in the name of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a person who's been hurt and probably couldn't talk them out of the things that they've been doing, but I gotta find out if we can have a single person's name, address taken off of a mail out, general mail out, because it's a bulk mail.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's possible, and then I also feel for that person. I almost want to send them back something, but I'm afraid it would just make them mad,
Well, give them something else to start the fire with.
Yeah.
So yeah, anybody who is critical of us when we're doing things could be a discouragement to us. Not everybody jumps on the bandwagon. When they are, I didn't put it in my notes. I will find it. It's 3:5. Nehemiah 3:5. So here they've started working on the wall, all right? And everybody's got an assignment. Everybody's building the wall in their little homes and stuff like that, rebuilding them. Verse 10, not everybody's working for the work of the Lord, okay? Verse 5 says, and next to them, the Tekoitas repaired, but their nobles would not stoop to serve their Lord. Okay, we know that God's with Nehemiah, so this is God's work, and you got one group who's not working in the church, who's not working to serve God here. Wouldn't that be a discouragement, right? So I think that would, I meant to write that in there, but I didn't. All right, moving right along. Nehemiah's determinations. There we go. iPad's working really good, Steve. Okay, Nehemiah, when he came over, he needed to encourage the Israelites to start building, right? So he wanted them to know that it wasn't just a public work. It was a public work for the Israelites, but he did want them to know that there's a bigger picture here, that if they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, it would give them a long-term, unlimited potential. Okay, it would raise their status. Here they were looked down upon. It would definitely raise their status. Okay, so then we go back to 2:1-5, and this is the book reuses the verses over and over again. So here we know in Nehemiah 2:1-5 that it was it was commissioned by the king, and that God was behind it. Okay, and he was so determined, he was willing to risk his life to talk to the king, right, to get the king's permission. So Nehemiah prayed to God. I already pointed that out. And the book talks about fulfilled dreams have two parents. One is courage. The father is courage, and the mother is faith. Okay? Nehemiah asked for several things from the king, right? Again, looking at Esther, very similar in that respect. So he was determined when he went that extra mile to ask those additional things. All right, which brings us to Nehemiah's planning. First thing he did when he got there, he surveyed, right? He surveyed for 3 days. That's verses 11 and 13, okay? But he did not tell anybody that God was with them, right? Why do you think that is? He ultimately told them when he gave them the charge to work. But before then, why do you think he didn't tell anybody what God had told him?
Maybe he wanted to see what they would do.
You think he wanted to bail?
Well, like, let's see what all we have.
Yeah, well, he hadn't been around, so he definitely had to survey it to say, oh, this is a lot of work. He had to count the cost, right? Going back to Gail's house, she wanted to make sure she had a plan. She wanted to make sure the plan was right. so that she could have the house built and encourage all the subcontractors to go in and do their jobs, right? Similar to us when we're doing VBS, right? We have a dream, a plan to have VBS. Well, it takes a lot of workers at the front doing their own little parts. Each teacher has their little pieces, but you have to tell them and get them energized. That's what Curtis did was it this past Sunday or Sunday week ago? It was Sunday week ago. To get the ball rolling, to get everybody start thinking about VBS 2023, right? So he energized everybody, and Nehemiah got a plan. So it wasn't a perfect plan, right? Because we know he has obstacles. He has people, Sanabala, whatever his name is, and Tobiah, who are naysayers. But he had a plan, and the end result of his plan was they said, hey, let's get busy building, right? Which brings us to presentation. All right, under presentation, that's pretty much where I call it a call to action. It's when you've got everybody energized and everybody's going the same direction, okay? Group encouragement requires, the book says, group encouragement requires a shared perception of a worthwhile and achievable goal, okay? So, using the example of VBS, we know we have a history of doing great VBS, right? Having a great turnout. That kind of motivates you for the next one. It energizes you. Coming in with the energy that Curtis has energizes those worker bees who are thinking and preparing and start working on the plan to, do VBS. He energizes us to get that goal, to meet that goal. Okay? That inspiration is derived from the ability to conceptualize practical and positive changes. So, what kind of positive changes is VBS going to do? What do we get out of VBS? I know there's an adult class for VBS.
I enjoy teaching, seeing the kids.
So from it, you get to teach the kids, yep. I enjoy, actually, this past year, I really enjoyed getting in and building stuff with Curtis and helping prepare the room in there, turning it into a circus tent. Trina? Outreach to the community. It's a great outreach to community. We have so many people who hear about our congregation as well as bring their kids in for VBS. That's very true. And it's an opportunity for us to invite people to come to VBS. Nope. All right, so Nehemiah's careful plan, straight talk, and contagious enthusiasm won him the support he needed, because the way he presented it to the Israelites, they jumped on board and said, hey, let's get up and start building, right? That was the end result that he wanted. Now, one of the words that comes to mind is zeal. You can have good zeal and you can have bad zeal. Who can give me an example of bad zeal? Who can tell me what zeal is? Pessimist? Excited?
Well, when you're looking at bad, person with bad zeal, they have to talk about, well, we did this, we did that, gee, the number wasn't that great, so,
Yeah, you could have a zeal to do the wrong thing, right? I saw your finger move. I thought you were raising your hand. So who can tell me of someone in the Bible who had a zeal but for the wrong thing? His name starts with an S?
Oh, Saul.
Yeah, Saul had a zeal to eradicate Christianity. That was his purpose until Christ came to him, blinded him, and then his zeal changed. And now what was his zeal after that? To preach Christ. He did a total 180, right? So he had a negative zeal, which was a very good thing from a worldly perspective, and he turned into a Christianity zeal to teach Christ, right? So you can have a good and a bad. All right, problem solving. In the book, it identified several situations that Nehemiah had to deal with, and the Israelites as they were building. One of them was criticism. So if you turn to 4:7-8, chapter 4, 7-8, we have Sanballat and Tobiah, and they're bringing in a few others. It says, but when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward, that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. Verse 9, and we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. So, problem, solution. The problem was the antagonists again, and they brought along some friends, but their solution was, we'll just put a guard out there, but it didn't stop them from working. They still continued to build, and they were doing so much good work on the rebuilds that it caused a greater problem. Okay, hardship. If we turn to, we're not going to read verses or chapter 5, 1-13, but essentially Nehemiah got back to him that, hey, there were some hardships going on with the Israelites who were building. Some of them there was a famine going on, right? And he said some of them were going in paying heavy taxes to the king because of the famine. And Nehemiah got upset, and he went and lectured them and talked to them. But he came up with a solution for their hardship. Discouragement. We've talked about discouragement quite a bit. Nehemiah and the Israelites had to look beyond the rubble, the fiery destruction, and to start working. Distractions, 6:3. They had some distractions. 6:3. Here you've got Sanballat and Tobiah back in action again, where they're wanting to distract him. And it says, and I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. They were inviting them down to, I didn't quite understand the significance of going to the doors of the gate. You know what that means?
That's where trials are going, official decisions are made.
Okay, you think they were taking them down there to trap them or something? Must have. So the way he dealt with that problem, he just said, I'm too busy. I'm doing God's work. I'm not going to go down there and worry about that. So that kind of shut them up. But then there was a real situation where he was dealing with some fear. If you look on down verse 10, there is this, I don't think he was a real prophet, Shemaiah, son of Delani. He was closed up in his house, and I guess it was had somewhat of a official status or what have you. But he said that they were coming to get Nehemiah and they were going to kill him. And he said, hey, let's go down to the temple. We'll hide out there. Well, if he's hiding out, what can they call him? A coward. I think of the song from Kenny Rogers, right? Yellowback coward, running and hiding. Well, he loses face, and it puts a marker, it kind of makes the Israelites look back too, that, hey, your leader is a chicken, right? So how he dealt with that? He just said, nope, I can't do that. I'm going to stay there and work, right? So, and courageous leaders, the book says, courageous leaders, and I'm kind of mashing this together. Courageous leaders must act on their faith. They must stand on principle at all times, but especially during crisis. Okay? All right. So the last thing, and I meant to put celebration here as well, is whenever you're working on something, I know like at the end of VBS, what do we do to celebrate the end of VBS? There's a picnic, right? But what's that? Yeah, it's a celebration of all the hard work, right? We come together, we have a meal together. Of course, that's before we have to clean up, right? Take all the stuff down and what have you. But we celebrate, right? When we've worked with someone, had a Bible study with them, right? And they make that decision, they're going to get baptized. What do? We announce and we celebrate we have a new brother or sister in Christ, right? Up in Mount Pleasant, Melissa probably remembers this, when someone would get baptized there, it was a smaller congregation, we would get around the building and hold hands while waiting for the person to come out so that we would sing and pray with them and welcome them to the family of God. Do you remember doing that? So it was just something, I've never seen it anywhere else. But like here, we have someone, if they're willing to stand, or we acknowledge them, and then everybody's around them, welcoming them on Sunday, right? Or as soon as it's announced. So we do celebrate those big things. All the work that went into bringing someone to Christ, that's something to celebrate. Well, that's what Nehemiah did in verse 7:1. They finished the wall, right? It says, now when the wall had been built, and I had set up the doors, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed. All right. Where's the celebration? I didn't get it in there. Well, then it goes on. I didn't get it in my notes. Well, they did celebrate. Oh, it is in there. 12:27. Let's go down to 12:27. Let's do it this way. 2, 5, 12. Okay. Dedication of the wall. And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness and thanksgiving, with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. So they had a celebration to dedicate the wall once it was built. And they gave praise to God for the completion of it. And I don't have that right here. So then reflection upon this entire episode makes us aware that encouraging leaders are the wind beneath the wings. We've heard this song from Bette Midler. The wind beneath our wings. No? Whitney Houston sings that? Okay. They both did? Okay. Well, you've heard it before. Let's put it that way. So it's saying leaders who can encourage you can lift you up and give you that motivation to go. Okay, so we're running out of time, so I'm going to just touch base on these. 10 steps for encouraging groups. Lean on God, right? Nehemiah definitely leaned on God. Identified needs. Well, before he even started, he had God on his side. He prayed to God, right? So he identified the need to God, and God gave him the determination to approach the king. He assessed the situation when he got there. He looked around and said, this is a mess. This is what we need to do. Then he made a detailed plan. Then he articulated a compelling vision. He got the workers excited, and they said, let's get up and go work. He delegated and authorized. I can't imagine him, he probably helped move things, but if anything, he assigned tasks. Like managers, you can't do everything. You can definitely step in when you need to, I would assume, and you need to expect criticism. You need to be able to resist distractions, especially those criticisms, and follow through on what you've done, what you've planned. And then, of course, at the end, praise and celebrate the accomplishment. All right? And then the challenge for next week, the call, is ask for God's help with becoming a more encouraging leader. And also, this week's assignment is to encourage a widow, young mother, or shut-in. Now, you know we've got our list. If you're not already doing that, or if you are doing it, pick a few more people, right? We've got the cards, fill their names out. You don't have to put a stamp on there. All right, so those are your challenges for next week. And then next week, as I mentioned, Paul will be teaching chapter 11, Courage to Bloom Barnabas. Okay? Will you bow with me, and I'll dismiss us with a prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you, dear Lord, for this class that we've had the several weeks to learn more about becoming an encourager. Father, we thank you for allowing us to identify things to avoid, to help us not get discouraged. And we definitely are thankful that you're with us as we make these decisions. Pray, dear Lord, that you be with each and every one of us as we go our separate ways. Pray, dear Lord, that you help us to make it back here, if it's your will, for Sunday, for the first day of the year, and worship you together. It's through Jesus' loving name we pray. Amen. That's cool.